Hello, welcome everyone to our webinar today on Microsoft Copilots, which tool when. This is the third webinar in a series that we're doing. So we've done prompt engineering already, which is available on our YouTube channel. We've done leadership can drive ROI for Copilot, which is also available on demand on YouTube. Today, we're going to dive into which tool when and untangle all of the different Copilots that are out there. Seems like there's a million of them, as you'll see. And next week, we're going to dive into extensibility for M365 Copilot. If you have any questions for today, please drop it into the Q&A, and we'll get to it at the end. I'm James Mace. I'm a senior consultant at WM Reply, and I'll be leading this webinar alongside my colleague, Ant. Ant, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, James. Hi, guys. My name is Anton. I don't know professionally. I'm an associate partner at WM Reply. I'm looking after the technical side of the business, including the technical readiness for Copilot and Copilot extensibility.
Great. Thank you, Ant. Okay, so today we're going to do a brief introduction of what we're talking about, and really we're looking at Copilot and all the different variations and forms of Copilot. So you're going to see that we're not really talking about prompt engineering. We're not really talking about how to use Copilot. We're going to look at all the different variations and kind of get an understanding of which role or when to use it, and maybe some limitations and that sort of stuff. So we've broken it down. We've grouped it by sort of personal use, productivity and collaboration, business operations, security compliance, and data analysis and development. At the end of each section, we're going to talk a little bit about the licensing, and then at the very end, we're going to do sort of a summary that shows how all of these Copilots are licensed. Okay, so the age of Copilots has arrived. And the next slide that I'm going to present to you, just to preface it a little bit, isn't meant to overwhelm you, but if you feel like you're overwhelmed, you're in the right place, because we're going to help you today to understand Copilot. It's a list of all the different Copilots that are out there, or everyone that we could find. There's probably more that we're not even aware of yet, but there's a lot. So today, this is what we're going to cover, right? Again, broken down by different categories. And we're going to look at sort of who they're for, what they're for, very briefly, maybe some limitations to point out, and the licensing involved in them. If you'd like to know how Copilot works, or how prompt engineering works, or how Copilot works kind of behind the scenes and how to use it, we have other webinars, as I've mentioned, that we've done in the past. And the next webinar coming up, as I've also mentioned, is a deep dive into the extensibility of Copilot. So we're going to talk about some of the tools that provide ways to extend Copilot, but we're not going to tell you how to do that in this webinar. That'll be the next one. Be sure to sign up for that. Okay, so personal. All right, so first we're going to start with all of the Copilots that are generally geared for sort of personal use, and this is pretty much by anyone out there who has access to the internet or to a browser, or is on Windows 11 for that matter, or even has a phone, as you'll see, and generally meant for sort of personal use. So let's start with Bing. So if you go to bing.com/chat or copilot.microsoft.com, basically if you're going to the website, you'll see Copilot, and you can access a screen that looks like what you're seeing on the screen in front of you. Right, it's got some suggestive prompts and a way to, start generating those conversations. This is pretty good for like content creation, summary, all that kind of great stuff. It can do images, it can access search through Bing, all that kind of stuff. One of the key things to note, and this is a common thread across this section for personal Copilots, is that they don't have access to your data sitting in your M365 tenant. Okay, now there are work versions of these, as you'll see as we go through, and that makes it a little bit of a weird gray area, but even those still don't have access to your tenant data. Okay, so this is all of the Copilots I'm going to mention. They're all basically the same Copilot, just sort of surfaced through a different mechanism. So first is Bing. Then you can toggle this, as I mentioned, from a web version to a work version. Now you can log in with your work account as long as you have pretty much any Microsoft license, or E3, 5, standard business, pretty much any Microsoft license, you can log in and get a work version. This still doesn't have access to your tenant data, but it can use Bing to search the web. So you can upload documents in a secure fashion, and Microsoft won't store those documents and they won't use it to train the model. So there are some edge cases, and arguably we could have put this in the productivity section, but this is a bit more sort of maybe personal research you want to do using the capabilities of Bing, Copilot, and maybe some of your company documentation. But again, no direct access to your M365 data. Other ways to surface the same two things, web and work, is through Edge. So if you're using the Edge browser, you'll see an icon that you can click on, the Copilot, and then a toggle between work and web. Same thing, just a different way to access those two Copilots. If you're on Windows 11, there's now a Preview Copilot button in the taskbar at the bottom. You can click on that. That brings up a window that shows you Copilot. That also has a toggle to switch between web and work. And lastly, Copilot on mobile. So there's an app that you can download on your phone. And the same thing there, you can add another account essentially and switch between them. And that's basically switching between sort of the web or personal version and the work version. And they all pretty much kind of look the same. They all have sort of prompt suggestions and a way to start your conversation and begin interacting with Copilot. Excuse me. Now, if you've heard Copilot Pro mentioned, right, this gets a little bit confusing because Pro starts to sort of sound like it's maybe business focus, but it isn't. It's still sort of a personal use. If you're familiar with ChatGPT, this is very similar to if you have a ChatGPT subscription, which would be the same as having Copilot. You can, or sorry, same as having, same as Copilot Pro if you have a subscription. So free ChatGPT is like free Copilot. If you have a subscription, you get Copilot Pro. This gives you things like access to the faster models that drive the AI generation, like GPT-4 and GPT-4 Turbo. You get access to build your own Copilot GPTs, which is kind of similar to ChatGPT and building your own GPTs through that interface. And if you happen to have a personal or family license to get access to things like OneDrive and PowerPoint and Outlook and that sort of stuff, you can use Copilot within those applications as well. And you get 100 daily boosts within Designer for doing images. Again, still no access to any company data that's sitting in your M365 tenant, still for sort of personal use, just a lot more features. One of those being GPT Builder that I mentioned. If you've used ChatGPT and gone in and created your own GPTs, this is pretty much a very similar interface. It would be familiar if you've done that. You can use the create function, which is using a prompt to basically say, I want to build this kind of GPT, and it'll build it for you. On the screen, you're seeing a screenshot that kind of shows the configuration to manually kind of go in, give it a name, give it a description, and give it some instructions. These are building GPTs that really sort of give you a focused kind of tool to do some specific thing rather than just sort of a wide open access Copilot. We're going to see another variation of this coming up for more of a business focus later on. But that basically summarizes our personal section. So same Copilot basically in Bing, Edge, Windows 11, and the Copilot app, all essentially free. Obviously in a phone for the Copilot app, you need Windows 11 for the Windows 11 version. Each of those, Bing, Edge, Windows, and app, have a work mode. You pretty much need any sort of Microsoft license to be able to log in and use that. And then the Copilot Pro is where you get into subscription fee of £19 per month. Excuse me. Incidentally, if you load the app version on your phone, you'll get a free month trial for that. And GPT Builder comes with Copilot Pro once you've subscribed at that level. Okay, now moving on to the next section, productivity and collaboration. Okay, I said I wasn't going to go too much into how Copilot works, but I've got 2 slides coming up here to give you a bit of a summary, because pretty much every tool in this section sort of has the same functionality. So I'm going to summarize it here. And one thing to point out here as well is if someone says Copilot or Microsoft Copilot or Copilot for M365, they're likely talking about this one. Okay, this is the Copilot that's in your Outlook, your Teams, your Word, your Excel, all of your Office applications. Okay. This is the Copilot that has access to your tenant data. This is a Copilot that's generally available for your business workers, but you do have to have some specific licenses, which we'll talk about at the end of this section. So this is a Copilot that you can use to draft content, summarize content, tweak and change the tone of content that you're creating. You can edit and increase the quality and readability of content. Catch up and summarize is a huge thing, which we'll look at in a minute. Focus on stuff, analyze, discover. All those great bits of functionality are all across all of these tools. So we're going to go a bit of a whirlwind tour, but keep all that in mind for each of these tools as we go through here. We're going to start with Copilot in Teams. Now, this is the same Copilot, so once you kind of know how to do some prompt engineering and know how to interact with Copilot, it's pretty much you're going to see a theme is going to be the same sort of thing across all of these. So I'm going to highlight a few differences in between them, but generally speaking, you can do a lot of your drafting, summarize. In Teams meetings, it works really well for summarizing a meeting, assigning or asking what the actions are, and those sorts of things. In Teams chat, you can ask it to give you a summary of open items you've been chatting about or highlights from a certain time frame. So it's handy if you've been away for a little while, come back, need a bit of a highlight. And then there's M365 chat, which shows up generally within Teams. On the left is M365 chat, or also as Copilot in the chat bar. Not sure why there's a different name there, but curious. And this used to be business chat, now labeled just either M365 chat or Copilot. And this is the one sort of weird exception to all the other tools we're talking about in the office space, where instead of going to Teams or Word or PowerPoint and then interacting with Copilot, you're just basically directly interacting with Copilot. So this is a little bit more like the experience we saw on the personal tools. You're just interacting and chatting with Copilot, and then it might create you documents, PowerPoint, Word, whatever it is that you're doing, but you get a bit of a different sort of approach to using the tool. So you could ask it to find files for you, recap meetings, and that kind of stuff. You can kind of access sort of everything all from like one place. In that chat, there's usually some suggestions for prompts. Now, we're not going to go into prompt engineering and all that kind of stuff, but just very briefly, if you click through to say more examples, you'll get into something called Copilot Lab. This is included along with Copilot, and it's basically suggestions for a lot of various different ways to prompt the system and get sort of an introduction to prompt engineering, as it were. If you want to know more about advanced prompting, check out the prompt engineering webinar I mentioned before. If you have Teams Premium along with Copilot, people tend to kind of ask a lot of questions about like what do I do in which, and do I need both, and that kind of stuff. They tend to work really well together. Okay, but the Teams largely focuses, switch to the next slide here. It largely focuses on some built-in automation, kind of built-in summaries and an intelligence recap, but it does all this at the end of the meeting, right? So you have your meeting, and then it kind of like adds on all these sort of like summaries and intelligent recap and that kind of stuff at the end. If you've got Copilot on the right-hand side here, right, you can actually have that conversation that you're used to having with Copilot. So you can ask it questions, and you can do this during the meeting as well as afterwards. So you kind of get the best of both worlds having both of these together. Moving on. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. You're going to see a very common theme as I go through this. These are all variations of using Copilot to do content creation, summaries, that kind of stuff across all the different Office tools. Specifically in Outlook, you might use it to change the tone of an email, for example. So there's a specific function where you can change the tone from neutral to casual to formal, and that sort of thing. Inside Word, this is your pretty common set of, drafting content, summarizing content, linking in other documents to pull in and make content based on those other documents. Conversely, the same thing in PowerPoint. You might take a Word document and get it to convert into a deck in PowerPoint, right? One of the cool things you can do within Word and PowerPoint that is a big pain point for people is consistent headers and fonts and that kind of stuff. And if you ask Copilot to help with that, it can set sort of all the same heading fonts and that sort of thing. So very handy little tip there. Moving on into Excel. Excel has some really powerful stuff where it's a little less of sort of the drafting and summarizing, that sort of stuff, but it's more like analyzing data. It can create new models. It can take tabular data and create charts for you. If you're not that familiar with formulas and not that good with Excel, you can ask it to add a new column and in natural language tell it what you want to do, and it will go figure out the formulas for you. You can even ask it to explain how it did that, which is pretty cool as well. Copilot is also in Whiteboard. There's some really cool stuff in here where it can generate some like templates for ideation sessions and do the usual sort of summarization and all that kind of great stuff. And again, we see it show up in OneNote. OneNote, if you got a lot of notes all in OneNote, you can apply Copilot on top of that and start sort of generating ideas, maybe using it to collaborate or creating to-do lists based on a whole mess of notes. Copilot in Loop. Now, this is an interesting one because Loop operates, if you're not familiar with Loop, it operates a little bit different from the other Office apps using something called Fluent technology, which is actually going to make its way into SharePoint, which we'll get to. And if you start a Copilot prompt by saying like insert a table, other users can actually collaborate in that same prompt and start iterating with you, add a column to that table, like, you know, and all through a natural language, all through the Copilot interface, but all through that sort of collaborative editing that you can do within Loop. You can do it right within your Copilot as well, which is pretty cool. Copilot in Forms. This is new stuff that's coming in Forms. You can actually get Copilot to create a entire form from scratch by giving it a simple prompt, right? Draft, you know, some sort of employee feedback, and boom, it's got a whole suggestion of questions. You can then iterate on that, get it to edit it, remove questions, add questions, set the theme, publish it, all that kind of great stuff. I'm going to hand over to Ant for a second here to talk about Copilot in Planner.
Thanks, James. But before we go into Copilot for Planner, you said that, yes, there's probably more Copilots out there. We missed one, which is Copilot for Stream, which is not live yet. It's coming pretty soon. But again, pretty much same functionality where you should be able to summarize your recordings based on the transcript from your Stream for Web interface. And Copilot for Stream is also included in M365 Copilot license pack. The Copilot in Tasks by Planner, though, this is the only one in this section which is not included into Copilot for Microsoft 365. So first of all, there is a big revamp coming to Tasks by Planner. Microsoft is basically merging the functionality of Planner, to-do list, and Project for Web. So on the one hand, you will still have your familiar functionality of the simple to-do list or simple Kanban boards where you can move your tasks. It's pretty flexible and configurable, works in teams. So this reliable and familiar planner functionality. Where on the other hand, James, yes, I take control and do this myself. On the other hand, because the planner is getting merged with the project, it becomes scalable, which means that you will be able to use the same functionality, the same set of tasks to actually build your project plan and do visualizations almost in the same way as you do them today in your project, and do charts, a lot of analytics. But also there is an intelligence bit which is getting added to the planner, and this is a Copilot for Planner. So what exactly you will be able to do with it? You will be able to generate new plans from prompt. When you already have your plan with your tasks, you should be able to generate subtasks, again, based on your prompt and based on the context of the parent task. You'll be able to set goals, track status, and then also benefit from AI-driven suggestions. So this is what we have for Planner. As I said, this is the only one in this section which is not included in Copilot for M365. So let's switch back to you, James.
Great, thanks, Ant. So next up, in the last part of this section, we're going to talk about SharePoint. So SharePoint is actually rolling out a whole suite of additional tools. In fact, some of them are already out, but Copilot specifically for SharePoint is coming in, I think, around June. But there are some other features, and a lot of these you'll see sort of support basically Copilot being able to do some really fancy stuff. So there's a new SharePoint start screen that'll have a Copilot button built right in that you just say create, give it a prompt, and boom, it can create a whole site for you, including a bunch of subpages. SharePoint co-authoring is coming, which I briefly mentioned when I talked about Loop. It's using that same collaborative Fluent technology to do co-authoring. There's page sharing, which I believe is actually already out. There'll be a new image web part, new stream web part, which I think is also out. The content pane for pages and news will get a revamp. There'll be design ideas included in there. News will be formatted for Outlook emails. And lastly, but not least, and one of the key things that I think will really sort of help drive using Copilot within SharePoint to create pages, edit pages, and do all that kind of stuff is the Brand Center. So the Brand Center, you can have different portfolios, maybe by region or by market or whatever it is. And this is where you can store your logos and your fonts and your themes and imagery and all that kind of great stuff. And then, of course, Copilot can take advantage of it. So what does all this look like? So almost everything that we talked about in that section, except for Planner, as Ant pointed out, is included in a add-on license. So you need an E3, an E5, Business Standard, or Business Premium license. And then you can add on Copilot for M365. That includes SharePoint as well. Planner operates on a separate plan, and there's plan 1, 3, and 5. The basic one is more sort of a personal use kind of thing, and then the other ones start to get into things like a desktop app and more enterprise tools, such as managing a demand funnel and all that sort of great stuff. So that's all of our productivity and collaboration tools. Now back to Ant to cover off some of our business operation copilots.
Beautiful. Thanks, James. So I hope that the previous section was familiar for everyone. If you are following the Copilot for M365 journey with us or on your own within the last couple of months. So let's step out of the comfort zone and talk about the other Copilots, which I think is pretty important to understand. As someone's asking in Q&A, yes, so many Copilots. How do you understand which one do you need? That's based on the use case, based on like the approach that you taken or the workload that your people are taking. It's not one size fits all. It should be always based on what kind of tasks you're performing. Okay, so Copilot for Dynamics 365. This is a little bit overwhelming slides, probably a little bit too much text to comprehend, but it's almost like a new separate universe of Dynamics 365. A lot of those tools like Business Central, Finance, Commerce, Sales, and in all of them, the Microsoft is rolling out the Copilot. It will have roughly the same set of functionality. You will have your very familiar right-hand side pane with your chat with your AI assistant, where you can summarize information, where you can ask questions about your data, ask for suggestions for next steps, also draft content. Most of the times that's a textual content like emails or updates. In some cases, for example, in Business Central, you can create media, but that's kind of what unites all of those Copilots in Dynamics 365. Where it gets, where it gets a bit more interesting. Okay, animation didn't work. We have Copilot for sales, right? Which may have a little bit of crossover with Copilot for Dynamics 365 for sales, but that's a separate license, that's a separate tool. You can think about Copilot for sales almost as if you have your Copilot for M365, and you will be able to plug it into your CRM platform, such as Dynamics 365 Sales or Salesforce Sales Cloud, to actually deliver the sales insights from those CRM systems into your flow of work, into your apps such as Teams or Outlook or Office applications. So the gains, it maximizes sales productivity. You can personalize customer interactions because when you open in the email, you will on the right-hand side immediately see all the information and all the insights which relates to this customer or to this particular query. And the important thing is that you're able to stay in the flow of work, right? So you don't have to switch between the applications. You don't have to go between your Outlook and between your CRM. You can stay in your Outlook. You have your insights from CRM right here, and then you can use them to actually respond to the email in the flow of work. Okay, so what kind of other functionalities are there? So first of all, yes, you can summarize content. You can generate new content. As we said, you can have a personal interactions. And one of my probably the best features is that you can have those suggestions. You can have this content within the call itself. So on your Teams call, you can actually have information and insights from Copilot for Sales to actually stay in a call and know the background of the conversation that you're having now. The next one, which is very, very similar idea, is Copilot for Service. Again, this is separate from Copilot for Dynamic 365 for Service. So this is a separate product which works in the same way almost as your Copilot for Sales. So this is you can think about it as a M365 Copilot with ability to plug into your contact center systems. And it's not necessarily just Dynamics 365. The service one is will be able to plug into your Zendesk, into your ServiceNow, so into many, many systems, and it will be extendable with Copilot Studio as well. What you will be able to do is, again, you will be able to access your knowledge as a support agent immediately, so you can connect to Salesforce, connect to your Zendesk, have insights, and again, helping agents where they work, whether it's a Teams call or whether it's an Outlook conversation. So again, you're receiving your ticket, you have your insights coming from your support system, and you should be able to draft an email or respond pretty quickly. Another one which is coming in this side of this half of the year in public preview from February is Copilot for Finance. Currently, it has 3 use cases which are all targeted to your finance professionals, such as data reconciliation in Excel. So if you're not familiar with what data reconciliation is, it's basically the process of matching your planned expenses and your actual expenses. So you can think about it as like intelligent way of merging 2 tables, analyzing trends and variances, which is coming soon. So it's not out yet, even in preview, and then collection process for accounts receivable in Outlook. So it follows the same ethos as sales, Copilot for Sales and Copilot for Services, but it's going to be Copilot for Finance, powering your interactions with, for example, in Outlook, such as account receivable, with information from your finance system. The target audience here is finance teams. There might be some crossover. You may be able to do some of those functions, specifically data reconciliation with Copilot for M365 and Excel. But again, accounts receivable and trends and variances, this is where Copilot for Finance will shine. In terms of license, Copilot for Dynamics 365, it usually included into the enterprise license. Not for all of them, the price is published on the web page, but usually they're priced as $95 per user per month. Copilot for Sales and Copilot for Service, and I assume Copilot for Finance will follow this suit. They're priced at $50 per user per month, and they require existing E3 or E5 for business standard license. But at the same time, if you already have your Copilot for M365, which today costs $30, you can buy as add-on Copilot for Sales or Service for just $20. Vice versa, if you decide just to buy Copilot for Sales, it will include Copilot for M365. So this is where we can conclude this section. So there are 3 products which are emergent from Copilot for Dynamics, Sales, Service, and Finance. And Copilot for Dynamics 365 is, as I said, separate universe. You can think about it as your Copilot assistant, which is living within your specific product for Dynamics 365. Cool. And now we are moving into the next section, the security and compliance. I think there's quite a lot of exciting stuff here. We were trying to group all of those Copilots into groups where you can actually comprehend them. So in this one, we included not just security and compliance, but also some of the admin tasks, which actually serve in your compliance and looking after the governance of your platform. So we'll start from the first one, which is the Copilot for security. What it can actually do, it will be able to summarize your incidents, do impact analysis, the reverse engineering of some PowerShell scripts. For example, if the script was flagged as malicious by the Defender, you should be able to use Copilot for security to unpack the script and actually explain what's going on there. It will have two models. One of them is just a standalone portal, or following the familiar ethos of the AI assistant, there will be Copilot integration within existing security products such as Defender, Entra, Purview, Intune, Sentinel, and Priva. So the target audience here is security professionals. And we have customers sometimes asking, okay, we heard about Copilot for M365, and is it including Copilot for security? Or what is it doing about security? No, those are separate products. There is a separate security conversation, kind of data governance with M365 Copilot, but this is Copilot for security, which doesn't have to do anything with Copilot for M365. And Copilot for security is designed for security professionals who are managing the security platforms in your tenants. The next one, which is quite similar, is Copilot for Azure. Again, we are targeting Azure administrators. We're targeting DevOps in some cases. So there is no cross-section with Copilot for M365 here. And this one is actually looks pretty cool. There's quite a lot of good functionality here, which is on the crossover between the admin, DevOps, and probably development, because it will be able to actually help you understand your environment or provision your services, but which is amazing. It will be available to gather some analytics and insights, creating queries for you, for example, in Custa queries. But at the same time, it should be able to look into your application logs and give you suggestions based on your problem on how to optimize your applications based on the history of the loggings and on the monitoring. But also, it should be able to generate CLI scripts or YAML files or configuration files for provisioning Azure resources. So this is pretty cool new product which will be rolled out. Again, targeting very specific audience, very specific set of use cases. And small segue from this one into the Power Platform, where I think we will have a separate conversation about Copilot and Power Platform, but there's also Copilot features in Power Platform for the administrators specifically, which were announced last year. This is a set of functionalities which is helping you to understand the kind of generating a summary of the solution or the recent changes for you, so you make an informed decisions whether you're happy to move this application to the next step in your pipeline. So you don't go and review actually manually what has changed, but you can also just look into the generated deployment notes and summary, which will be generated by a developer, and understand what has changed, what the application is about, and actually make an informed decision of whether you're happy to proceed further, or you probably need to take a step back and speak with your developer. Okay, pricing. A lot of this is very, very fresh. Copilot for security will be available from next Monday, from 1st of April. The pricing here is very different from everything we've seen before, where it was per user per license, but it kind of follows the consumption model, which is quite familiar with Azure. So if you were working with Azure previously, you know there is a consumption model for a lot of resources. It will be the same principle here. So it will be costed as $4 per hour for a one security compute unit. So this is not very clear today what is a security compute unit. You can compare this to DTUs for databases, but what Microsoft suggests as a beginning is to provision 3 security compute units actually start with Copilot for security. So Copilot for Azure, there's no cost available even in preview currently, so we don't know how much it would cost. And the Copilot for Power Platform admin is actually included in Power Platform licenses. So as you know, as Power Platform admin, you don't need to have a premium license to develop or to manage your packages. So it's kind of coming into the package of existing license. Okay, great. Let's take a breath in, breath out, and move to the next section, which is the data analysis and development. So here we will start with Copilot in Power BI. So it looks like the very, very familiar user interface. You have your Power BI report, and on the right-hand side, you have your Copilot assistant. Today, Copilot for Power BI is targeting the makers, so the people who are producing the reports. So there is currently no functionality which is available for everyone who is consuming reports, say on a web page, where you can go and just ask questions about the data. So rather, the Copilot is available for the maker. So you can say, okay, I need a report which is showing me the insights on a specific topic, like for example, how many cars are passing the avenue on weekdays comparing to weekends in peak hours. And then Copilot will be able to suggest and generate the control for you and for the consumers as well, which is showing this data analysis and providing those reports. It will also be able to generate your summary about the data based on what's in reports. So quite a neat feature. And again, it's sitting in this section today in our webinar because the target audience for this one is mostly the data analysts and developers who are producing the Power BI reports. Okay, and then moving to the next one. Next one on our list is Copilot for Power Automate. So Copilot for Power Automate, again, this is targeting the makers of the automations. So the same familiar interface where you can actually ask questions which are related to Power Automate as a technology. So if you're not sure how to do something, you can ask it here, or you can actually command Copilot to perform certain actions in your flow. Say, you can say that, okay, after the first step, I would like to insert a condition, which is if true, it's getting my profile, or if it's not true, it's dropping the file in SharePoint folder location, for example. It will show you the suggested changes to the flow. And if you accept them, it will actually make those changes to the flow, and then you will be able to roll it back or do not accept. And then again, you will be able to ask Copilot questions about how to do certain things. For example, I am retrieving a big JSON file. How do I parse it and minimize it so that I don't need to have all the fields in my JSON file, but I would like to strip it only to display name and email, for example. And it will suggest, okay, those are the steps you have to do. And it will suggest you to actually include those actions into your flow. Okay, the next one is Copilot in Power Apps, and this one is taking 2 slides today. So the first one is the same principle as on the slide before, where we have Copilot for Power App makers, where again you can ask Copilot the questions about your app, or you can actually command it make changes to your application. There are quite a few limitations today, what you can do, what you cannot do regarding the supported controls, regarding the properties that you can manipulate, but you're still able to do certain things with it. And then on the other hand, there is a Copilot component for the users of Canvas app, which you can connect to your data source, and where you should be able, as a consumer, as a user of a Canvas app, to ask questions about the data, which is powering your gallery or powering your lists in Canvas app. So this one is actually quite similar to some concepts of Copilot for M365, but it applies. It's been surfaced in Canvas app, and it's applied to the data which you decide to connect it to in this particular application. So it will not be able to go wide into M365 and search for something, only operate with data source, which is being used in this particular app. Cool. And I believe at this point, I'm handing over back to you, James.
Great, thanks, Ant. Just do a little bit of jostling here. Get me on screen there. Okay, so let's talk about Copilot Studio. So we're getting towards the end of this section, and then we're going to do a bit of a wrap up on the summary of licenses and get to the questions. But just before we do that, we're going to talk about Copilot Studio a little bit. We're not going to go into sort of how it works and all that detail, because that's actually in our next webinar. We'll go into a lot about extensibility and extending Copilot, and that'll cover some of the Copilot Studio nitty gritty. But for those of you with a keen eye on this slide and the next slide, you might recognize this as sort of a revamped PVA editing tool, or Power Virtual Agents editing tool. It's basically just sort of been taken over and rebranded as Copilot Studio. And I think there's even going to be some more upgrades in here to be able to use prompts to, generate your own GPTs. But if you remember about what I talked about kind of towards the very beginning, with the personal Copilots, you basically have, if you subscribe to Copilot Pro, you get your own way to make your own GPTs. Those are ones you can keep private or publish out kind of on the web. This is a different layout, but the same idea, essentially making your own Copilots, but still within your M365 tenant, right? So you can customize it with all kinds of things. You can extend it with integrating to Azure AI Studio, cognitive services, bot framework, Power Platform, AI models, all sorts of things that you can do in here. Sometimes you might need someone to build something in the back end, or have an API or a service available for to go in and build your studio, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And then there's a management piece to this as well, where admins can kind of see who's building what Copilots, what they're doing with them, and what they're customizing and that sort of thing. And like I said, it has sort of various new sections kind of to it that are largely in preview, but it kind of feels a little bit like PVA. But unlike building an old school Teams bot that you had to go in and create topics, and if a user asked something that wasn't one of those topics, it would default to a response that, like, I don't know, I can't help you, or escalate to a human. You can use generative AI to reason on content and create text and respond in a natural flow. So it's pretty cool. One of the things you might connect Copilot Studio to is Azure OpenAI Service. Now, this is one of a bunch of AI services, and we'll touch on the other ones in just a minute. Drawing this one out a little separately because the cost is a little bit different. These are mostly pay-as-you-go or consumption-based tools, but this is essentially allowing you to tap into tools like GPT-4, DALL-E, creating content, creating images, and essentially giving you the power of kind of like, ChatGPT, and you can use it to build kind of whatever you want, right? Conversational bots. You can use it to ground against data either in your tenant or in data that's in other sources. You can get it to run against all sorts of different models. Some of the things that you might want to tap into are the other AI services within Azure, which Just to run through these really quickly, include things like enterprise scale search, content safety, which is kind of neat, monitoring for stuff, profanity and other stuff that you might not want it happen to appear in conversations. Additional document intelligence, extracting information out of content, speech, so everything related to kind of spoken audio, translation, transcribes, that sort of thing. Language, which is summarization and analysis on using natural language processing. Translating, which is also very handy. And then lastly, vision, which is everything to do with images and analyzing and extracting detail out of images. All of these are sort of pay-as-you-go sort of consumption services within Azure. All of them generally have pre-built models that you can actually use right off the bat, or you can go in and train and provide your own data and train your own models, and then you can then surface these through APIs and through into your custom code or into Copilot Studio for that matter. There is also an Azure AI Studio. Now, this is a little bit more geared for building those models, connecting things together, and actually building the sort of behind the scenes using those AI services. So if GPT Builder is for the personal users out on the web, and then the Copilot Studio is for the business users within the tenant, then you get Azure AI Studio, which is probably more developer-based. And you can use it for all sorts of things, improving customer experiences, work quality, all those kinds of things. It's basically cutting edge models on sort of a unified, open and flexible AI platform. And lastly, in this section, hand back over to Ant for a minute to talk about GitHub Copilot.
Yes, I will not take control back for this one. So GitHub Copilot is a separate product which is targeted to developers. And in this case, I mean, developers who are developing code in traditional, like a pro code languages such as C# or JavaScript or Python, probably PowerShell as well. So this is a separate license which you will be able to use in your Visual Studio or your Visual Studio Code. I believe it also has plugins to integrate in your JetBrains products, so maybe a little bit less robust functionality, but the same language model, the same engine sitting behind the scenes. It is able, even today, to generate you a pretty decent code based on prompt. And it can do things inline. So for example, if you're editing your code, you can say, hey, can you insert me here a REST API call to the service, and it will give you suggestions, or you can select an error, select a text and ask to explain it. But also when you're using this as a chat on your sidebar, you can speak with it as with your like very knowledgeable coding assistant, almost like a pair programming. So you can ask it to generate code, or you can ask it to explain something. You can ask it general questions about the technology, but you will not be able to ask it questions about the general knowledge or about your data, or about what was the latest score in the recent rugby finals. Right, so it's just for coding, just for developers, basically. So yeah, that's it for the GitHub Copilot.
Great, thanks, Ant. So just to summarize this section, a lot of what we talked about, it falls into that sort of consumption model, except for GitHub at the bottom there. So Power BI is a consumption model. Power Automated Apps is generally included if you already have the license for Automated Apps. Copilot will show up in there if you have the right kind of M365 license. Studio is licensed as sort of a 25,000 messages per month at a certain rate, and then you can pay more to go above that. All of the OpenAI services, the other AI services that I mentioned, the OpenAI is different because it's based on the model and it's a token-based. If you're not sure what tokens are, you can think of those as words. It's basically the words in your prompts that you send into the model, and then the words that come back from that model. Those are basically equivalent to tokens. If you want to know more about that, watch the webinar on prompt engineering. The other models are a little bit different, and the pricing is a little bit different. There are 1,000 sort of records, either text or image or whatever it happens to be for those services. AI Studio is free during the preview, so it's only in preview at the moment. My suspicion is it might become a license, kind of like Copilot Studio, or it could even maybe be a consumption model. I actually don't really know, since a lot of this stuff is still pretty new. And lastly, GitHub Copilot is a standalone license with 3 variations, sort of individual, business, and enterprise. Okay, so let's do a quick summary of all the licenses and all the Copilots that we've talked about today, and then we'll get to your questions. So if you recall at the beginning, I flashed up kind of the whole list of Copilots. Hopefully today you've gotten a bit of a better sense of sort of which Copilot is what and where they appear. And I've rejigged the list here to kind of group them now, instead of by sort of function or role or that sort of thing, by the type of license, essentially. So starting on the left, the free ones are the ones in Bing, Edge, Windows 11, and mobile app. It's essentially the same Copilot. That's your personal ones generally. If you have some kind of Microsoft license, you can log in with your work account and access the work version of those. Again, all of those are still the ones that are outside the tenant. On the left-hand side, the right-hand side, sorry, the consumption model, that's actually the main Copilot M365 falls under that, because again, you need that underlying E3, E5 or standard, business or premium license. That'll give you all the Outlook, Teams, all of those things we talked about, including SharePoint, even the Power Apps, Power Automate. The exception there is Planner. Talk about that in a second. Some of the other things fall under consumption model as well, so finance, dynamic sales, and services. Then you get a few standalone models. So Copilot Pro, the personal one that you can use, which includes GPT Builder, that's a standalone cost. Copilot Planner and GitHub Copilot are also standalone costs as well. You don't need another license to get those. And then the middle column at the bottom there, add-ons. These are generally sort of like add-on licenses that you can pay for stuff like security and Azure and Studio and services and that sort of thing. Great. Okay. Now let's move on to the messages or questions. Sorry, messages. All right. Let's see who we've got asking questions in our conversation here. Okay, so Lori asked, so many versions, so many Copilots, completely confusing. So hopefully today we realize there is quite a lot of Copilots. But generally, if someone says Copilot, they likely mean the M365 one. And then usually, if they're talking about something else, it's Copilot for a specific use case, right? So for professionals working in security, or developers working in GitHub, or very sort of niche areas that people use, or the free ones that are out for personal use, kind of on the web or Windows 11. So hopefully today has shed some light on all the different versions of Copilots. There's another question in there on Copilot for Planner. I did look into this, and it's not all that precise from the Microsoft information that we have at the moment. But if you basically want to try out the premium features of the new Planner app, including the Copilot in Planner Preview, you can get a free trial, or you can go to the Planner app and click on the little diamond icon, apparently, that will take you to get a premium license to work with that. If you've got Project for the web, and have an associated project license, one of those Project Plan 1, 3, or 5, you should already be good to go and can use those premium capabilities according to the license that you have. Now, what does that mean for the future? Not quite sure, because those plans are basically project plans, and Copilot for planners in preview. And so they may, when it comes out of preview, it may be bundled in those licenses, or maybe that'll be a separate cost. Not quite sure, so we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think most likely the license will get renamed from the Project Plan 1 to 3 to Planner, maybe Planner Free, Planner Premium 1, 3, 5, and then yes, those 1, 3, 5 will include Copilot
and likely include Copilot. Yeah, that'd be my suspicion as well. Where do all the Copilot for Viva X products fit into this? Is it public information whether they are included in the Viva premium licenses or as separate add-ons?
So this one is, it is actually public. For example, Copilot for Viva Engage and Copilot for Goals And I can assume any other Copilot for Viva X, which will be released, will be included in the Viva suite, which is kind of the premium one, but that's a standalone license, which I believe is 9.9 USD per user per month. So they will not be included into any other plan, whether it's like a Insights bundle or the M365 generic, but they will be part, and some of them are already part of the Viva suite today. So yeah, I'm pretty sure this is public. I'm pretty sure if you go into the Viva suite pricing page, and it has a lot of products, and if you just toggle the visibility and ungroup them, you will be able to see the Copilot functionality for each of them.
Again, yet another Copilot that we didn't actually include on our list since there's just so many out there. And last question, it looks like in the Q&A at the moment is, do the various Copilots in Power Platform have graph grounding or any crossover if the user was also licensed for Copilot for M365? So yes, is the simple answer for that. Generally, you're using your Power Platform, Power Automate, Power Apps, that kind of stuff to access, content that you've got in your M365 tenant. I guess it's tricky because largely the tools are sort of geared for the makers currently, as opposed to the end users. So the makers can use Copilot to create this Power App, or use this Figma to create a Power App for me, or, create some kind of business automation process and it'll create the flow for you kind of thing, right? So it has access to your M365 data as the context of you, the user, creating these tools. I don't know specifically if you could say, create an app based off of this document, for example, but I know there is integration for images in Figma to create apps from. So there's some of that type of crossover. But grounding usually is a little bit more when you're asking Copilot to help you and do stuff, and it's accessing the graph as well as the large language model. And that's usually a bit more or less on the making side of things and a little bit more on the user side of things, I guess. And those tools they're not quite there yet for Copilot to sort of ask questions on an app or on a Power BI report, for example, and that sort of thing. Ant, anything to add on that one? Or?
No, nothing. I think you're right. At least I've never used the Copilot for Power Platform to be based off the document. I'm not quite sure whether it's out yet. But again, yeah, this is just from a maker perspective. From a consumer perspective, as we said previously, if you drop this premium component into your Canvas app, it will only be able to connect to the data source that you allowed it to connect to.
Great. Okay, so that's all the questions we have for today. So just to sum up, so I'm James Mace, and I've been joined by Anton. And so you can reach us on our emails on the screen here if you have any follow-up questions about Copilot or how to get started with Copilot in your organization. As I mentioned at the beginning, we've got a couple that are already online on our YouTube channel on demand. Today has been the Which to a When, and next week is coming up with the extensibility for M365 Copilot. Also, if you happen to be kind of in the London area or close to London and around the beginning of May, specifically May 8th, you can use the QR code on screen to register for one of our sort of main yearly big events that we call Fall in Love. So we've been doing Fall in Love series for quite a while at WM, and the next one is on all things Copilot for M365. Great. Thank you for your time today, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. And if you watch us online, hope you have a nice Easter break.
Bye.
Thanks.